Welcome everybody to the Mid-Curve podcast. This is your, I guess, bi-monthly, bi-weekly, semi-available podcast about the world of crypto, NFT from Mid-Curve, a group of traders, degenerates, and all-around weirdo people who like to talk about this stuff. My name is Funky Donk, also IRL. My name is Gavin Purcell. I am formerly a person in media business, kind of in that business still. Do a lot of work under my pseudonym Funky Donk for Overpriced JPEGs, the Web3 brand, and also then do other stuff too. So that's me. Eric, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hey guys, it's Eric, former TradFi weirdo, now full-time crypto weirdo.
Okay. Grant, what about you?
Hey guys, my name is Grant. Background in consulting, and 2 years ago I made the grave mistake of playing around with internet tokens, and here I am.
Okay, great. And Sadie, how about yourself?
I am a concurrent TradFi and crypto weirdo. Work in private equity.
Great. Okay, so that is us. It has been an extremely eventful couple weeks, week and a half in especially the NFT space, but we'll also get into some crypto talk today. I think we probably need to start with with the NFT market, which is so annoyingly hard to kind of fully understand what's going on because there was a huge dump, obviously, coming up of the Azuki Elementals mint. I mean, everybody I think who listens to this podcast is very familiar with it. Actually, I do, but there's one person I think that I would love to hear their thoughts on about this whole thing and kind of where Azuki sits now, and that is Grant, who is part of the Spirit DAO. And you can either speak for the Spirit DAO or you can speak freely. I don't know how you guys deal with that sort of world, but Grant, where do you feel Azuki sits now, and kind of like, do you find that they have like kind of pulled themselves up out of that mess?
First off, I speak only for myself and barely myself. Mistakes were made, I think, both in terms of like the pre-launch communication as well as the actual execution. And although opinions are divided, I personally think some of the post-launch communication also wasn't great. Although it looks like in recent days they've battened down the hatches and figured out what the tone needs to be. But I think net, it's just, an already kind of drained ecosystem got a lot less liquid. And kind of the belief system. I've talked, I think, at length on this pod about kind of suspension of disbelief in that whole concept, but I think a lot of people's illusions shattered because that project was one of the ones that few people really believed in, right? And now there's almost nothing left to grasp onto, and so once again, illusions become shattered and people become more cynical, and this is all part of the bottoming process, I think, for most risk markets.
Yeah, I think that all makes sense to me. I think the thing that really, and I think the one important thing to know, and I mean, everybody again who's listening to this podcast knows this, but when the Azuki mint did not go very well, and then there was a little bit of that, from the Discord AMA where there's a little bump and then it came out of it, and then a lot of FUD coming out of different places on Twitter, out of the, there was a pretty big thread that supposedly was shared amongst Chinese crypto Twitter, or I'm not sure which. I think it was Chinese crypto Twitter, about one of the whales who had really felt bad and wronged. All this to say that there was this kind of major dump over the weekend, which then kind of like spread across a ton of other projects, which I think, to your point, Grant, is really about the idea that we all kind of felt, especially coming off of that event, that Azuki had their shit together, right? That this project felt like one of the ones you could trust. It felt like that they could really get something interesting out. One of the things that I've kind of been shocked by, because I haven't been part of the Azuki ecosystem for quite a while. I was at one point. Was I didn't realize that they hadn't shared like previews of the stuff at all, and I didn't realize it was a thing. I mean, Eric, you were also an Azuki holder, and you were kind of in the middle of this, and I know I watched your kind of like take on this evolve in real time as it went down in our Discord. Like, where do you land right now, and kind of like where do you see this project going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to Grant's point, I think like it just boldly punctured the illusion of competency.
Mhm.
Um, and this is, I feel like a bigger issue across most Web3 projects is that, your monetization lever is to really create like anticipation and hype and speculation, but the actual substance it often leaves a lot to be desired. And this is not strictly limited to Azuki. I would say this broadly applies to pretty much everything in the ecosystem. Um, and I think like this was just a really big reminder of that out of what was a pretty inopportune time for the market. Coming into this, it was already things were already very sensitive because we had a pretty nasty cascading liquidation of Bored Apes that was,
Yeah.
that were just obviously that process was accelerated. Um, I think we were in a situation where Machi and some of the airdrop farmers were still back holding a lot of assets and just kind of dumping them into a no demand zone. Right. And so this was kind of like, inadvertently, whether intentionally or unintentionally, like a lot was pinned on this moment because other projects had planned to make announcements after the fact to basically ride on the momentum of whatever Azukis were doing, right? And obviously like the exact opposite thing happened.
Yeah.
And you saw basically Memeland and the gods just soft push like whatever they were gonna announce to the right because they didn't really like want to get caught in just the smoking crater of this. And so I think like, obviously that's the impact from an ecosystem perspective, but like on a project level, I think like for because there were no previews, and the mint process was horribly executed. I think things were already like very, very tense because you had this situation where a lot of OGs could not mint because the website was rate limited. They delayed the claims for in-contract assets until basically after the mint. And that was something that I think a lot of people were also waiting on. So like, people like I think like people were already like, okay, this is the art is gonna be good. The art is gonna be good. And I think a part of the issue with like doing a gotcha collection is that you don't get to see everything at once. So it's actually it takes time to actually make a assessment or judgment on like whatever it is, whatever the collection looks like, right? And so initially, when the first couple of PFPs revealed, it was all floors. They look very similar to the OG collection, and I think that just from the outset, it just completely put the project on the wrong foot. And every all of sort of the dissatisfaction, the animus, and the anxiety coming into the reveal, exploded, right? And you just had this massive storm of FUD of people complaining, guys like dumping their stuff, abandoning the ecosystem, big long-time holders feeling betrayed by the team. Right. And then, we kind of had a temporary reprieve because they said, oh, we're going to do a spaces and address the issue. Um, which did not help at all because I don't think there was adequate prep on the comps. I think, this citing his inspiration for, it was very clear that he was not prepped at all because his answer basically boiled down to like, I didn't think about any of the implications with the
Yeah.
reveal, with the randomness, with the rarity. Oh, and by the way, I was just trying to recreate Top Shots, which for any like long time like NFT enthusiast is the last thing you want to hear. And I think that just like really, really kind of further exacerbated the situation, right? And so it was just, I think it was just like a very emotional response. Everyone yanked liquidity, and then we had this massive deleveraging process occur across the ecosystem, which got us, to the bottom. Like what was at the time is what is at the time the bottom, right? So now I think like we're just on this recovery process. The team is obviously pivoting and trying to kind of accelerate the next part of the roadmap. But I think like this is this will take time to heal, and it kind of very, very much fits into that the overall that fact pattern I mentioned, that like generally speaking projects so far in the space, even the big ones, have just been thoroughly unimpressive. Because
Yeah,
by the way, while this is happening, right? Like we had Yuga announce their heavy metal,
Yeah.
which I think had a very overall like a pretty mixed response.
yeah, I would even say mixed to negative in
But
general.
yeah,
Like
we had the Memeland reveal, and basically the quote unquote famous artist that they've been teasing was basically someone that was responsible for the localization of Digimon in the 90s that Ray couldn't even remember the name of when he was on the spaces talking about it. Right. And so it kind of just I think it's just like there's still like way too much bait and switch. And creators complain about building in public because they generally are not good at building, period. And there's a lot of deflection into other market forces that really aren't relevant considerations into a wider project is failing, right? And so I think like the one silver lining of this is that the two good things is that one, we took a lot of leverage out, which is always great. I think it gets us like to the reset point faster. And two, like the implosion was so atrocious across the space that like people from shitcoins and DeFi actually like swam by to look at like the carnage.
to
And
watch the carnage.
that was probably the first time like the NFT space had like outside visibility in like forever.
Well, what's interesting to me about that when you say that is it did feel like, in the past, like all the elements of when the NFT bags are going down, generally it's been triggered by FTX or by something else, or like shitcoins are blowing up and everybody moves their money into there. And this time it was like, oh, the whole NFT space is blowing up because of these like things. I think just to echo a couple of your points there, I think that are really important. One is Azuki feels and felt like to a lot of people like a kind of like a pinnacle of what was possible, and that this moment of like it's almost like we've all been feeling that like is every project in this space idiotic, and this was like one of the projects like, oh no, Azuki can't be idiotic. Azuki knows what they're doing. They've look at that brand deal they just did. Look at that Las Vegas event. They really know what they're doing. And then to have it come off ultimately, what I would say is just so half-assed. Like, to me, the problem I have with this is you had over a year before between this and the Beans reveal, and the idea that like this is the thing. And by the way, even if this is going to be the art, fair enough. I totally get it. And I will say, and I've talked about this in the Discord, and I think Eric, you agree, and I think probably Grant does too, and Sadie as well. I'll come to you in a second. The art is great, right? That Steam Boy is a great artist, and I think that the actual stuff that is coming out that's getting revealed is really solid, and I would say almost better than the OGs, a lot of them, which is good. That's what an artist should do. They should get better over time. But it just felt like it was just like, what are you guys doing? Do you not understand anything about your market? Like, have you been paying attention to the people who actually buy the stuff that you do? Or have you just been like going into the back room and spending your money or doing whatever, living a life that's outside of this space? And it makes me angry as somebody who spends my time in this space because, like, look, my bags are way down, of course, and I have families and all those other things I would love to spend time with, or all these other jobs I'm doing. But like, I get angry that like I know what they should have done, and like I'm not running a $100 million project. But like, if you had put me in the room with those guys and they showed this to me, I could have said, like, here you go, guys. This is the problem. They're supposed to be the smart ones, and this is just, it's so frustrating. I don't know, Sadie, are you a holder of Azuki? Are you holding any Azuki itself?
No, I sold during the original FUD.
Right. Me too.
And the reason I sold was not because he rugged. I'm not that fussed about that. The reason I sold was because it illuminated the fact that he had just gotten lucky.
Interesting.
And so I think there's this sense that like its success was on purpose for Azuki, but the fact that he had all these other projects, it was somewhat strategic, I think, that he framed that as FUD around the fact that he had soft rugged. The soft rugging was not the problem. The problem was the kind of spray and pray.
By the way, speaking of that, somebody just showed me, which I'd never seen, the art for Tendies. Have you seen the Tendies art before?
Yeah.
I had never seen it. I don't know how I'd never seen it, but good Lord, it's almost as bad as the Cumberverse art, which if you haven't seen the Cumberverse, it's now my favorite project. Go look it up, cumberverse.eth. Sorry, go ahead, Sadie. Keep going.
No, I think it's like the irony is that everyone thinks they're investing in something that's on the come when in reality they're investing in the hype generated by each other. And so being able to predict when that will be generated and when it will go away is how you succeed in this space. And it's unfortunate, right? Because you just want to invest in the thing. But unfortunately, because the thing is largely devoid of substance, you have to invest in other people's perception of the thing.
Or the people, right? Or the people. And that is a
I'm
perception
not,
as well.
And I think the people are largely devoid of substance, right? And so you have to invest in everyone else. You have to invest in the hype, and then you have to not believe it. And that's like fundamentally unfortunate and like to some degree heartbreaking and jading, right?
Right.
And so I think this was like to some degree, I think this was like the ultimate impact of that earlier FUD for people realizing kind of what it was, which was not around a rug. It was just the fact that they had accidentally been successful rather than on purpose.
That's interesting. Eric, what were you gonna say?
They lucked into probably like the great artists. You know what's always carried Azuki is actually the PFP art. It's easily identifiable. You know, you have very, very standout traits. There's a lot of diversity across the collection, right? And so it's noticeable. And that wasn't enough to kind of bootstrap like this very, very strong community with a lot of whales in it because they all liked it. And so I think this is kind of really unfortunate because you know, Steamboy put like a year into this collection, and it actually like when you look at in its fullness, and now we have enough assets revealed to really evaluate it. It's great, right? But I feel like it's just been completely marred by like just totally botched delivery. And I think this just comes down to like you know the fine points of the execution. I think like the relative immaturity and inexperience of that team that wasn't really confident enough to just have the product stand on its own. Because I think that unfortunately like they weren't promising gaming. They weren't gonna. We all knew they were not gonna promise a coin. Everyone knew that they were gonna do a new collection and announce it, and the market wanted it, right? And so you know how you really position yourself going into that is that's what makes a difference between like what we have now towards like what could have been like you know just a dimensionally better executed event. So you know it sucks because I think like there are people within the ecosystem that have a lot more invested than we do. And I think have to like actually try to build off of the IP in different ways. So it just you know, they always say like this is supposed to be decentralized luxury brand, but like you really can't, you know, you can't do this stuff because it just really undercuts your system builders and supporters, and that's not the way to do this.
I mean, ultimately, all you want is to believe that the people who are running the project you're invested in have a vision, right?
Yeah.
And when that glass shatters, it doesn't come back.
Yeah. Although the argument with Azuki would be is that it shattered once already with the thing from before, right? Like, so maybe
disagree. So I would argue
okay.
that the execution was so important here because it was the next thing. Right. So they had one really successful reveal, and this question of was he successful accidentally or on purpose was an open question.
Right, I see what you're saying. So this was like the kind of proof is in the pudding moment, and
this was so much like the execution here was so much more important than in any just standard project.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's just like the only reason that this is not at like a 0.5 floor is because the PFPs themselves are really, really good. Because through the entire process, you had really, really steady volume above the floor on mid rares, which you basically do not see in any other project right now. So you actually like you're actually seeing people like reveal the assets and actually go buy what they like, despite everything else. And so that kind of just tells you that like what the underlying thing actually resonates with the targeted community, but it just, you know, you go out there and you're like, yeah, I'm not at the top shots. I really didn't think about probability distributions on reveals, or like for the bean airdrop or like the reveals, and I completely fucked over my big whales. Like you just what do you say to that? Like that's that's just bad. So,
Pretty
I think
bad.
you like it's and like they had like 2 days to prep for this, and that's what we got. And I think
Well, that's
that's
okay.
like
Here's another question I
disparaging.
have. And I don't know, maybe Grant, you can, if you've gotten some sort of like some sort of other information or heard something, because I may have missed it, but like, why did the reveal have to be so quick after the mint? Was it always the idea that they were going to? I mean, obviously, it wouldn't have made a difference, I guess, but it just felt like it was all going super fast, where the beans took like a really long time to reveal. And I'm just wondering, like, do we have any sense of why that was the way this time? Was it any sort of idea?
I think reveal was fine. Like trading intentionally didn't start until reveal happened, which I think is actually more responsible. Like not farming royalties without having seen the art in itself. It was just like the mint timing. 10 minutes for Azuki holders and 10 minutes for Beans holders. I think it belied essentially, lack of confidence and insecurity in their own abilities.
Yeah.
Right?
Do you think
Because,
did they think they weren't going to sell it out? Is that why they did it so quickly?
well, I think what I said already answered that question. Right?
Fair enough. All right,
I think
fine.
there are two things that stand out to me from being a holder for a couple of years and having attended the Vegas event. I think the art is elite and the real life event execution is superb, right? Like those two things will forever stand out to me, regardless of the eventual fate of the project, which for most is almost always zero. But I think leadership this time definitely got things wrong, right? Because what saved them last summer, beyond the rationalization of, he didn't fuck up the execution of Azuki, he fucked up the execution of older projects with much less thought and planning, was that, whales truly believed in him, right? Like,
Right.
people like Andrew Kang and others I won't name check, like, doubled and tripled down, and they saved it, right? And during a period where no one else wanted to buy, and, it was also equally in a period of relative illiquidity, right? And this time, basically the RNG behind what holders of rare Azukis would get was completely out of whack with what they had invested in the ecosystem, and that had more to do, I think, with the price than anything else, than the stupid shit about humans being in the V2 art, right? Because that can be explained away in the lore or whatever else that you can come up with, right? It was basically not rewarding your strongest supporters and the
Right.
ones who had pulled out the checkbooks for the past year, essentially saving your ass. So, I mean, I think last thing I'll say is I think the market knows and everyone knows that this is the last chance for them. And they're truly lucky, because I don't think many projects get more than one look, let alone two or
Yeah.
three. And yeah, it's kind of, liquidity wise and market dynamics wise is like one thing. I think that's cyclical. But I do think like this, the V1 or the first age of major NFT founders have completely failed. Which is undoubtedly true.
Yeah, I mean, I can't. It's funny. I was thinking, I don't really feel like we need to talk about Yuga that much, but like, the interesting thing about Yuga is Yuga succeeded obviously in a different market, but like the one thing I will say that Yuga, like the beginning of this year, it kind of felt like there was a little bit of like juice coming back from the Dookie Dash stuff, whether or not you like Dookie Dash, but I was thinking about the fact that Gordon is gone now, right? And I think that Gordon is somebody who, I'm not saying that they're a perfect team in any sort of way, and Gargamel is obviously still there, but like the Yuga had executed relatively well up until that point. And, the heavy metal drop, I think mostly starts to feel like, if anything, a little just kind of bland. And I think this is, we're in a place where I don't know if there's a good founder. This is actually a good transition to talk about Memeland, because I think, to Eric's point from earlier, there was definitely some kind of promises made around the artist for the Memeland art, and clearly it's not that. I will say, I'm I admire what Ray is trying to do here with what this is. And I know in general, my initial reaction to like make your own trait NFTs is like, oh Lord, I've been burned on so many of these. They're just not worth it. They're never worth, they never stay value wise, never trade. The thing I think it's important for people to know, and again, people who listen to this podcast are probably pretty familiar with it, but I really do like the idea of starting to think of, and maybe it's not for all NFTs, but there is a world where buyable traits is a really interesting idea that I don't think has been done, at least at the level that they're trying to do it at with Memeland. And if the meme drop works, if meme doesn't completely crash, it actually could drive a really interesting use case for an NFT token, in that if you pull a rare of any specific collection and you suddenly have a thing that's worth 100 ETH, that's amazing. How lucky are you? You know, you sell it and you get this 100 ETH. That's great. Obviously, the chance that you get that is pretty low. Now, the benefit of like if you were able to get either from some sort of weird raffle everybody gets into, or you could buy, like the way I've been thinking of it is like, you know, the Memeland crown. And if you bought the Memeland crown and you could put that on your character, and the crown itself is worth 25 ETH, it is a sellable asset that you can hold, but you can also social signal by owning it. There's something really interesting to me about that idea as kind of the evolution of where we go from NFTs. And it reminds me a lot of like CSGO skins or things that are actual tradable stuff. That doesn't mean you're trading your entire identity in some way. Sadie, what are you up on the Memeland ecosystem or the Memeland idea? Have you been following it?
A little. I just think if you put it on the Flow blockchain, that would really
that would really make it good. That would really make it good.
That's what it's missing. You got to run it back Top Shot style.
Top Shot style, Doodles 2 or whatever. Like, I think if we're gonna go tradable trades, like let's go all in and just go centralized blockchain.
The difference to me about before we move on, the difference to me between obviously Doodles and Memeland are in some ways it's a similar thing. Obviously, the flow thing is a big issue. I honestly think the difference here is the token, and I know this sounds old school and weird, but I think there is a flywheel that I can see that a token plus this kind of mechanic could be an interesting use case. You know what I mean? Like there could be something interesting around the idea of a real thing that a token could be spent on that's directly connected back to the project. Like even with apes, the only thing you can really use for ApeCoin right now and really spend ApeCoin on is, you know, entrance into Dookie Dash or Heavy Metal. There's not a lot of other places to use it.
Hang on, let's just roll it back a little bit, right? Because this is not unique. And so because when Ape originally launched, the promise was like we're gonna have this vibrant gaming ecosystem, right? And Ape will be the currency that backstops that gaming ecosystem. Because we're gonna build like the Unity style SDK that other builders can build on. And then you know the transactional currency across that entire platform is gonna be based on Ape. It's just, you know, and so I think like what Memeland is trying to do is they're trying to do that, but I think in a more like realistic setting, which is we're gonna do trades. We're gonna do collabs and have artists come in, and you'll have composability across the trades on your avatar. And meme will be sort of the back end currency for that, which I think is a good idea. Which is even more infuriating to me that you know he thought he had to couch it in like, oh, we have like a famous artist. Right. And again, just kind of goes back to like the lack of confidence, which I don't rate, you know, given his experience in Web2, he can't really play the inexperience card. And so it's just like, if that's what it is, just say that's what it is. Don't couch it in like mystery or speculation, and kind of just like build it. Like, you know, just say, I'm going to do this. It's going to be fucking good and you're going to like it. And so, you know, that's it. Like you don't kind of have to do like this weird bait and switch, like, you know, carnival show like that. Doesn't, at the end of the day, like only sets you up for disappointment. Right? Because then people initially see the art and it's just like, well, this is not great. And then they have to like spend their own time to digest. And I just, you know, I think it's just like dude, like, and then he goes out, he's like, oh, you know, I wish like people cared more about royalties because the royalties are free creator. And it's just, again, like, I just what are these founders like smoking? You know, like, dude, like the community backstops your initial mint. We give you 10,000 ETH on the captain's mint, which is backstop funding that's automatically subordinate to the actual seed financing that you already raised, right? And so like basically the community bears all of the risk with no recourse, and this applies to almost every other project, right? When shit fucks up, it's the large holders within community that really has to step up and keep things together, right? And you're out here complaining because we didn't, you didn't like it that traders didn't want to pay your 9% transfer tax. Like, grow up. It just it's just this is just like when I hear stuff like that, it's just like, do you actually care about your community, or are you just, you know, similarly trying to extract value? And when you have actual investors and there's equity, and you have a fiduciary duty to those parties, like where holders stack up is a relevant question in that consideration. And generally speaking, holders are secondary.
Oh, for sure. I think for sure they are.
And so, that just like, don't get on your soapbox and give me those bullshit. Just like do what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. Grant, what about you? What's your thoughts on where Memeland sits right now?
As a current holder, no comment.
Oh yeah. Speaking of which, as a current holder, I think meme will be great. Please buy meme. It will be so good.
I am also a current holder.
Just give me an exit, please.
I honestly, here's the thing. I will say one last thing about this on my end. Sadie, I want to come back to you to see your thought on this, but I think the game Yuga comparison is slightly off, only because I think a lot of people at the time could have told you that idea was bonkers in the time period that people thought it was going to happen. I think that the idea of a game ecosystem that will be run on Ape is like, at the time it was announced, which was like right around the other side mint, which is over a year ago, is that would have been, multiple years away to get to the place where it'd be actually valuable. And I think we're seeing that pretty clearly at this point. And I think that drives in part because games are so hard. The thing that's shocking to me about Yuga is now they brought in Daniel Legre, whatever, 6 months ago, from Activision. And this heavy metal game, I haven't played it, so I don't know, but I've seen enough about it, and it just seems like underwhelming. And my thought is, again, it's like, why are they making? Why can't they make an easy or even license somebody else's engine and make like a good fun game and not have something feel like it's kind of it's not fully baked? And maybe they're just trying to get product out and they're trying to keep the game going, but it just is a disappointing thing. Anyway, this is all a long way to say that games are really hard. Right? Games are crazy hard. And I think at least with this, there's a world where it's like the traits could be available like day one, and then they could continually, you could roll them out over time. And there is a world I can see, knowing Ray and how Ray can kind of play this game, that it could actually work in an interesting way. It gives him the opportunity to continue to really roll the ball forward, which seems to be something he's very good at.
Yeah, so I don't doubt that at all, right? I think he's that team is perfectly capable of executing. So just execute. Like, don't complain about royalties.
Right,
don't complain about royalties for your PFP speculate. Like, just enough of this. Like, oh, like we want holders, not speculators illusion. Like, that's just say what you want to say it, right? It just, I think that part of it is just like, just be upfront, because your holders are already warehousing so much risk.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sadie, do you have a thought on this?
Not really. I think I agree. I still think there's this tendency. I'm not sure if it's an honest tendency or if it's more of a kind of like maintaining the illusion tendency to just speak in language that implies that people are doing anything.
That always building.
Like, the reality is, right, people are just clipping the coupon and going about their other lives.
Right.
And I think there's like slightly heartbreaking honesty in that. But I also think that if ultimately what shines through is the community and the art, you have a whole bunch of artists who dedicate their lives to this space. And if, things go back in that direction, it's not the end of the world.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, let's pivot over to what I'm just learning about, and I would love somebody to tell me, maybe Eric, you have the best sense of this right now. What is the most recent news around Binance? Something around their lawyers all quitting at once. Is that the right starting point?
Pretty much most of it seems like the senior execs on their legal and compliance teams quit, including Patrick Hillman, who's one of the I guess one of like their top legal guys, has been pretty vocal on Twitter. When the initial news broke, he basically came out and said, "Hey, like I'm at having a kid, I'm at that stage where just I need more personal time," which is a pretty standard line for people when they want to leave it when the situation gets bad, because to my knowledge the other three executives that quit aren't having children at this point. And there is no upside in saying, "Hey, I'm leaving because I think like there's massive fraud and I don't want to be party to this anymore." Like that never happens, right? And so there was a Fortune article that basically broke the story, and within it, one of the things they alluded to is a year-long DOJ investigation, that included looking at how like they were tricking regulators, they were potentially involved in money laundering, and also potentially like violating sanctions. And I think that really, like, when the DOJ enforcement action announcement, like when they do that press release, I think that's probably going to be like the meat of the announcement. And so the question is like, where do we go from there? Because and Sadie can probably add more context, because I think like if that's what the DOJ has, then they have like a pretty good weapon to just debank and deplatform Binance globally.
Globally or just in the States? Why globally?
Well, whether it's whether it's within the states or outside of the states, usually when you're dealing with transfers of U.S. dollars or any form of currency, or you're dealing with entities that want access to the U.S. currency system and the U.S. Treasury system, that it gives them incredibly long reach in terms of like enforcement action, right? And this is particularly true if sanctions violations are involved, and like they are proven to have aided, in basically foreign sponsors of terrorism and just outright U.S. adversaries. Like that gets pretty nasty, which is why you don't ever want to be on the other side of something like that.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Sadie, do you want to fill in? Yeah, what do you got?
I agree with Eric. So the thing about money laundering and other OFAC and sort of sanctioned entities is that lack of knowledge is not a defense. And so you are guilty if you interact with any of those entities, either directly or indirectly, which is the challenge with Tornado Cash when it got sanctioned, which is that, if you're in a mixer with a sanctioned entity, technically you're guilty by association, because you may have had some sort of economic interaction with that entity. It's sometimes diplomacy based, it's sometimes treaty based, but the norm is that those are enforced pretty consistently, basically all over the world, but especially in the US and Europe. And so if Binance ultimately gets in that kind of trouble and not like securities SEC trouble, it effectively deplatforms them globally because money flows are global. And if no resident of like basically a first world country in the West, but also certain countries in the Middle East and certain countries in Asia, if none of those residents can even risk interacting with those dollars,
they won't. Right. That makes
they
sense.
can't. And so I think to some degree, if you're a legal or a compliance person and you think those dollars are tainted, you have to quit because they're paying you.
Oh, interesting. So that's an interesting point, that basically if you don't quit and when you find out that you're essentially you're committing a crime essentially.
Well, yeah, and also you're providing economic value too. So it's two ways.
Right. Interesting. That's not good.
I don't know if that's why. Just that's the worst case scenario. Obviously, I have absolutely no view on whether or not that's happening here, but if it does, it's exactly what Eric said.
Yeah, I think at this point we just have to wait for the DOJ announcement. It seems like in light of everything that's happened and the timing of the legal team leaving, that announcement is probably imminent, coming like in a matter of days or weeks. So whatever they announce there will give us some indication of what we're dealing with here.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's not great, and I will say, here's my question about this. I think in the last 6 months, you would have said if Binance falls, we're all completely fucked. If this does happen, are we completely fucked? Or is there in the crypto world, let's take all the NFT stuff out of it. In the crypto world, along with, BlackRock's now look like, the ETF is going to go through. In the crypto world, is there enough like kind of momentum and upswing around crypto that could survive something like this? Or do we feel like this is another, FTX style, or maybe not FTX in the same way, because obviously FTX had massive fraud and I'm not sure how much exists here, but is this another black swan? Are we going to be entering black swan territory, and are we going to be in trouble if this is the case, or can we survive this as more of a speed bump?
I actually think it's really, really bullish because Binance has always been such an integral part to just the entire ecosystem. But because of their history, like there's always going to be this legal regulatory, overhang attached to them, and I think that makes institutions uncomfortable. So, in a situation where let's say like Binance does get the platform and people take their money off the exchange, well, like theoretically those assets and funds, assuming they're all there, which I think our going assumptions that they still are, will just cycle into other more compliant exchanges, or those assets will cycle on chain, right? And then that's when, in conjunction with the BlackRock ETF, you start to have regulatorily compliant institutions step in and start to take the reins as kind of new custodians who can actually navigate the framework and do things legally. And that Binance imploding was always kind of the last piece of FUD. And so if you unwind that, I think in an orderly way where there's people on the other end to take the reins, we're going to do a better job. I don't understand why that wouldn't be like a huge long-term plus to just the entire crypto world.
Okay, I have a new question here, which is going to sound insane, but now that I just put my 2 and 2 together, okay, maybe there's a world where what's happening, and I can't remember, Grant, I think it was you who said like V1 NFT founders are all not great, and maybe it was Sadie. Maybe it's just V1 crypto founders have not been great, and what we're waiting for is the next generation of these people. And who's that NFT person, right? That's the other question. Is like, not are there going to be opportunities for like legitimately interesting real people to come in and found projects in the same way that like. Now, granted, BlackRock is BlackRock, and they're doing financial services things. But it's an interesting idea that like this is like the crypto world in some way kind of growing up through the bullshitters and through the people that kind of just half-ass their way through stuff. I don't know. It's an interesting thought in general for me to think about this idea of like, if that's bullish for you, Eric, like, I would imagine that ultimately there will people that will come into the NFT space and do a similar thing for the NFT space, right? To be the kind of person you would hope that would come into it.
Monkey, it's you. Like,
give me a break. I'm not doing that ever again. I'm done.
But you know what I mean? Like the whole point of being here now is that it's us. It's not somebody who's going to come in. It's everyone who's here. And like that's kind of the whole thesis. So when Eric's bullish, it's because like it's the moment. I think that that is the opportunity that a lot of people wish they had positioned themselves for in the future. Right.
When you say it's me, Sadie, are you saying that I should launch Sheet Fighter 2 and it should be like animals and demons as the PFPs? Does that sound like a good plan?
I'm saying that I heard you say if you were in the room with the Azuki team, you would have done it better. So
yeah, that's actually, we actually have that on record.
You're giving old men with white beards holders the priority here, right?
Don't worry. In fact, here's the funny thing. There's a little bit of inside alpha to all those, thousands and actually 100 people who own old men with white beards. I do have something I'm working on, and it's taken me forever, but I will release it eventually. So it will come out eventually. I have to get my other 4 podcasts off the ground.
Attention to our 3 listeners. Please sweep the floor of old men with white beards.
Yeah. What is it at right now? I'm actually curious because it was holding up pretty well. Here, I'm gonna just look real fast while we're here.
He's pretending he doesn't know exactly what the floor is.
Hey, it's not bad. 0.069 for a free mint. That's not too bad. You can't argue with that as a free mint, and it did fine.
And
so
there's a
anyway,
grand
there you
total
go.
of no bid liquidity on Blur, which according to NFT experts is really, really bullish. So please.
That's very
Yeah,
bullish.
stick with Blur.
By the way, I
bullish.
had this conversation earlier today. If for those of you who we can actually let's move on to the Blur convo because I had an interesting conversation today on my other podcast where Carly, Riley, and Zeneca and I were talking about the Blur thing, and we kind of got into it a little bit. Carly and I disagree on the Blur thing. I think my take, and I think we probably mostly agree with this, is that like there's a lot of blame going around about Blur right now being the people that like tank the market, which to me just feels ridiculous. It's like blaming the knife for stabbing somebody in a way. And I think that my argument in general, the bigger, larger argument is that it's demand, it's supply and demand, and that like there's a whole plethora of problems around this stuff. But I think that it's an interesting thing to see Blur kind of get demonized in a lot of ways because what I keep thinking is it feels like it's all people's psychological bullshit coming out in this time that makes them because they're already feeling so bad. Now, granted, I will say Blur it makes the market more liquid and you can go down and you can go up faster because you can get access to things and you can sell and buy things and the bidding incentivizes people to buy and sell, which is I think a good thing. But in the down markets, like sure, can it possibly speed up a down cycle? Conceivably. But I do want to, Grant, I know you're an investor, but I'm kind of curious as to your take on why do you think everybody's blaming Blur right now? Like, why did this moment come around like right now that it's Blur's fault that all our bags are down?
Because the system is too complicated for the average smooth brain to understand, and so the new kid on the block has to be.
Because all of our bags are down. That's the short.
I will say, the team's execution, particularly around some communications recently, haven't been perfect. But they're by no means the main culprit for why we are where we are, right? And there's a whole host of like different threads that could go down, but I think chief among them was this guy who basically failed to build like an EVM wallet tracker, which is just a joke because there's so much fucking EMF on that particular segment of the market. And now he's pivoted to becoming like a BTC maxi of some sort. But anyways, he posted an article about how Blur was killing the market. And I think the main hypocrisy here is if you think any piece of this asset sector has like any type of Lindy effect or is truly a valued asset, then none of this shit matters. So why are you whinging about it? And secondly, why are you so sacrosanct about who is providing liquidity to this sector? Like, yes, there are MEV botters and DeFi farmers who are running the ecosystem and providing liquidity for your JPEGs, but why is it so evil that they are the ones doing it instead of the NFT whales that you worship? And isn't it a sign that things are bad? They don't actually value your Bored Ape at 150 ETH, right? That they stopped buying there and we're selling there. Like the arguments in chief don't make sense to me, which is why like I don't even bother responding half the time.
You should at this point you should be forced to take a course on liquidity provisioning before you trade any JPEGs. It's just like they're blaming the marketplace, but the reality is when price goes down, it's because large holders are selling, and price didn't go down as much as before because large holders couldn't sell because there was no liquidity out there, so they were trapped, right? Like imagine a shitcoin that had a $50 million market cap and a 500K LP, and you held 5% of the supply. Like you can't sell. Like there's no way out. So you have to hold and pretend everything is good, even though you so very, very badly want to sell, right? And now a Taiwanese dude by the name of Machi puts $10 million in the pool, and you can get out, right? So what are you going to do? You're going to walk, right? That's exactly what OSF and Mando did, and that's what a lot of large holders started doing, right? And that wasn't. It's just these are shit coins with pictures, and so use the shit coin analogy. This is just people drop money into the liquidity pool. So you're going to take the real money and you're going to leave them with the token. And that's what happens here, right? And so again, like I feel like we're talking in circles because it just goes back to like projects aren't very good, so no one wants to hold them, and we're not attracting outside people. And so yeah, you can blame the marketplace for facilitating what is like basically an exit for longtime holders that have held like through a lot and probably honestly deserve to exit. Or you can just kind of look at like the problems of the space and actually hold project creators accountable because at the end of the day, Blur is a marketplace. It can only facilitate transactions. It cannot make new projects.
I would say there's also a financial literacy component to this. So in the context of like a typical market, you have bids and ask, and the price is the average of the highest bid and the lowest ask. The way that I blame OpenSea for this problem far more than I blame Blur, because they developed a floor price paradigm, right? Which made everyone think that the floor was support, but it was really resistance, right? And so you had a market that was totally supply driven, totally one-sided, whereas most markets are supply and demand driven. So what happened was that we just repriced the market to be more in line with the way markets are conventionally priced by creating a bid. And so what happened was a repricing that didn't, it was a repricing in people's perceptions, but it wasn't a repricing in reality. The price was the price. It was just that people were anchored to a floor price that was an elevated price.
Let me ask a question to both you, Sadie, and to Eric, and Graham, feel free to weigh on this too. But okay, so part of my argument in this thing, and I feel like, again, as I've mentioned this podcast many times, I'm an English major, not a financial genius, in the slightest, probably a financial moron. So my question is, in a true bull market, when prices are going up, and let's say Blur existed in the summer or the late summer of 2021 when everything was going crazy, would Blur have ostensibly, if demand was accelerated at a significant level, is there a world where Blur could bring prices up rather than down? I assume there is, correct? Or am I crazy?
No.
Okay.
What Blur did was just normalize the way we think about the pricing of NFTs in the context of how we think about pricing of fungible tokens. So Blur adding the bid would have always brought prices down, but the trajectory, right? So this is a one-time repricing to put NFTs in line with how we price all other financial assets.
Okay.
But the trajectory would have been the trajectory. The market's cyclical. And so they're actually two unrelated phenomena. At least in my view. Eric and Grant should chime in, but
I mean, it's time and place, right? It's just demand's negative right now, so prices are going to go down. And when demand actually grows, Blur, I would argue, probably would push prices higher than where we would be with only OpenSea, simply because they enable more seamless leverage looking at NFTs.
Right.
And so that always, obviously, on the way up makes things super nice, and on the way down, as we saw last week, it's very, very painful.
Yeah, I think the same way that if you had like a Coinbase that was you're trading ETH on a centralized exchange, and you took away the bid, like obviously the ask would be higher.
Right. That
so
makes sense.
This was just the opposite.
Right. Okay, that's fair. I mean, anyway, I think it's going to be. I honestly, my whole take on this is it's psychological. People, I think it's boogeyman. It's looking for someone to blame. And again, I hate to use the metaphor. It's not guns that kill people. I kill people, but like, it's kind of that, right? Like, it's kind of this idea that everybody needs to look at themselves in the mirror before they start blaming a marketplace for the reason why the bags are down. And I think the hard thing in this space is there are a lot of people that want to believe the world that was 2021 and early 2022 is just where we get to live forever. And clearly right now, the majority of the mainstream world has moved on from that place. So we're living in a very different world.
Yeah, what I will say is, like, look, the liquidity provisioning on Blur is far from perfect, right? It's definitely a work in progress, and I think they're trying to address some of the major issues with this recent update of trade bidding. because you basically had like you were too bottom heavy in the liquidity being all on the floor, and there was no liquidity kind of in between, and that just caused like collapse and heavy devaluation of mid rares. And I think now they're trying to distribute that liquidity more evenly. And it actually like I think again like I think that's net should be a positive development over time, because it just gets us closer to the conventional marketplaces that Sadie was talking about. And I think it also just kind of makes it, it makes it adds that layer of complexity that you needed for liquidity to be within the right spots, right? Because I think right now, like one of the bigger complaints for a lot of traders is like, hey, like I have like a semi-rare or a grail, like yeah, Blur's great if I want to just dump it into a floor price and take a big haircut, but like otherwise I'm kind of stuck in the same situation. And so I think this starts to bridge that a little bit, and it just makes it a little harder to game the airdrop farming system, but just by like pumping a bunch of bids in at the floor and kind of taking haircuts. And now wannabe market makers have to be a little more intelligent, and probably have to use a lot more automation in terms of how like where they provide liquidity. And that's where we need to be for like financialized marketplaces to function. Like you need just more advancement on your liquidity provisioning, and we're just not there yet.
There's also, I think, like we can call nostalgia what it is, right? Like the last cycle wasn't perfect. Like we had fucking, I'm just thinking back, like the morons from the Full Send podcast, like do like a 10K times 2 ETH mint, and obviously dozens and dozens of examples after that, right? Like when a market and its underlying infrastructure becomes more efficient, and the participants also level up in terms of intelligence, and hopefully, knock on wood here, financial literacy, like it just forces the creators to level up as well, right? So either we get more shit that's truly culturally and in other ways like groundbreaking, or the space is dead, right? Like I think we just get our answer faster, and I think I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I would say to follow up on that, the one argument I still kind of think that there's some merit to, and I don't put this on Blur's feet, but I do think, I know, Grant, I think you and I disagree on this. I think the royalties conversation, as bad as it was for traders, really, when that whole thing blew up, I think it changed the dynamic of how creative people saw the marketplace and saw the product that they could make. And I'm not saying there's an answer to it, because I don't know what the answer is, but I can tell you my personal sense as a creative person when I saw that blow up is I was very bummed. I understood why it blew up. I understood like what the purpose and traders wanted, but I think this is where you get to the heart of what NFTs are, is this weird combination of creative product and financialization. And like in the past, those two things have not gone together very well often, unless they are, I guess the thing you can think of like in buying records or in buying movies, but there are often like, business people who run companies that distribute artist products in those situations. And that's a really interesting way to think about whether or not, the creatives are the ones that are going to be best served trying to be these business people. I don't know. I think you're right, though. I think we're going to find out very soon if this is a reasonable thing to consider going forward. Yeah, that's my thoughts. Anybody have any last thoughts before we wrap up here?
I was just going to say, like, through this royalty debate, we didn't really, like, most of the artists actually just kind of kept chugging along, and some of the biggest opponents of the OpenSea registry filter were actually very, very prominent art blocks artists. So look at who's complaining and look at who's actually doing the work. And
by the way, I'm not.
It's really instructive.
I think once this whole thing once the idea of royalties became debatable, it was over. Do you know what I mean? I don't mean that in a way. I think it was probably like the same thing that we were talking about before. It was probably like 2021, 2022 vibes. But I think the easiest argument to make to say, I don't know, let's pick somebody out in the world like Quentin Tarantino. That's a bad example because he did do an NFT that wasn't very good. Some creative person, Wes Anderson or whatever. An interesting argument to make to Wes Anderson or to like kind of any mainstream artist would be like, hey, there's this really cool way that you can get paid for your work in perpetuity because this thing exists, and every time it sells, you get a certain percentage of it. It's a very that was like this interesting thing where the artist felt like a sense of ownership over the long form owning and creation of something. It could feel like he or she or they was going to get paid throughout the lifetime of the thing they made. And that is something that has never really happened across any art, right? And that was an interesting, really fascinating thing. And I think it's just gone. And to me, you could sell that to people who were creatives, and you could say, like, look at this really cool thing, come bring your talents here. And now what you're in the business of is like, you got to make a product, you sell it, and then that's it. Or you sell it and you have to figure out a subscription model or all this other stuff. I don't think there's an answer to this, but my feeling is it was just an interesting thing that existed to bring creative people into the space, and it doesn't anymore, which just kind of bums me out.
I mean, we can agree to disagree on this, but I don't think it just necessarily kills royalties. I think this is just a market reflex of when people are willing to tolerate royalties and when they're not.
Well, so you think that when the market steams back, that royalties will be a thing that people will be able to implement?
I don't think it's a market function. I think it's a creator function. I think when artists and creators do go into space and they create things that people find meaningful, I think there will be ways to enforce royalties either by the smart contract or basically socially. Because while this conversation has gone on, like, we've seen art trade hands, right? Like, the art world did not collapse in the wake of this kind of new liquidity paradigm. It existed within like its own pocket, and I think it's just because within like those circles, there's actually a pretty broad like social contract in terms of between collectors and artists.
Right.
And at the end, I think that's a really, really key part of it, right? Where it's like, we talk about like cartoon PFP projects where all of the incentives on both ends are totally mercenary.
But I guess my question is, imagine a world where there's a project which is really interesting, utility-based project or something, and there is a thought where if you found a way, and again, this is where it gets back to that same sort of thing. It's art versus financialization. It's right. Like, how do you keep people? I mean, everybody has their own thoughts on the Goblin Town Mint, right? But like, on Goblin Town as a project. But like, what was really interesting about Goblin Town was that it was free, and they knew that they could have this royalties mechanic to be like the thing that paid for them. Now, I don't know what they did with their money. They've done other stuff with it, but like, that brought an interesting project to the forefront that was allowed to kind of like people to access, and the royalties became a thing that was able them to keep creating on the back end. I mean, what you're saying too, Eric, I understand that, like, it depends on what the artist's sort of scenario is, but I also just think from a standpoint of being creative people, there are opportunities that were existent in the world of royalties where, in fact, the interesting thing with royalties is like royalties is a little bit better even than having to, if you mint something up front, if somebody has to pay for something to mint, then you are in the business of, as a holder or as a collector, you're saying, I'm giving you money because I trust you. What if you don't know what the fucking people are? You don't trust them. If you mint something for free, and then over time the project grows and they make their money because of royalties rather than it has to be another drop or it has to be something else. I don't know. I just keep thinking that the royalties it is something that felt unique and felt like there was an ongoing thing that could be something. And maybe that's the point is that you're making, is there's a world where we will figure out a way to do royalties and there can be something going forward. It just feels like it's super broken in that way right now, and I'm just not sure where we go forward.
Yeah, I think the point that Eric's making is that royalties never broke except for the people that took advantage of them in the first place, right? So the people you're advocating for right now are the people who have made the most money off the space, right? People who are creating like some half-assed goblin PFP, right? And they're breaking in millions. The artists, the genuine artists, people who are selling their shit at Sotheby's, they always had royalties, and they will because it's a social construct.
I will, but by the way, but Sadie, I'll disagree 100% with you, and I think only that I believe there's an art to the, and you can think what you think about the Goblin Town art, the actual art, but there is an art to what they did and what they've created, and it isn't just physical art. This is what I think I'm getting at, is the sense that like the Wes Andersons of the world may not come and be a painter and sell painting, an artist like that. Like that is the high end art world. I think what I am more interested in, which was interesting and what Goblet Town gets to the heart of, is not about the art, it's about the experience that was created.
But that experience that was created was predicated on a promise of value, and people got fucking burned, right?
No,
and
but they didn't.
So much
But was
value
it?
exited.
It was
the space
free.
in the form of
Was there a
royalties.
promise of value to that? Like people who
Yeah,
bought
of
it after the
course.
fact.
People bought after the fact, right? Like people wanted to be a part of the community, and the vast amount of value that has exited the space through royalties meant that most buyers got wrecked.
You can't play the free card. I think that's where I have to push back on a little bit, because if your mechanism is that it's free and you enforce a royalty, your only monetization lever is speculation on the back end, on the assumption that somebody else is going to come in and pay for it.
Okay, well, hold on one second. What? But wait a second. Okay, let's. First of all, I think we should do a much longer conversation on this, and I do have to get back to doing my work because I feel like I fundamentally disagree with all three of you on this, and I knew I would because I think we're just coming at this from a slightly different perspective.
Let's table this for now, because
Yeah.
I know we have to. Grant has to run to the Spirit DAO space, so I think
Yeah.
we can wrap this up. But this is probably like a really good sidecar discussion for a different podcast.
Yeah, for sure. And by the way, and I want to be clear, like, I also understand where y'all are coming from, and I'm not coming at this as, and you know that, I'm not coming at this as a royalty maxi. I just have some really interesting thoughts on it. So yeah, let's wrap it up, and we'll table it, and we'll get into this next time. Thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks to Sadie, Eric, and Grantland for being here. And we hope you all have a good week. Survive whatever comes our way. Binance FUD. Maybe we'll get another surprise in the Azuki world. Something else will happen. Oh, I guess we have the DeGods season 3 to look forward to. So maybe that will be disappointing as well, and we'll be 3 for 3 across the board, and it would be a real blast to see how the NFT market does then. But until then, bye bye, y'all. We'll see y'all later.